Every year about this time, it happens, I get a sinus infection. Fortunately for me, it started Monday. And so by the end of the week, I'm usually pretty good. I lost my voice earlier in the week, which was great for Tracy, our office person, because she'd have to listen to me. But by the end of it, I just constantly have to drink stuff because I get this little tickle in my throat. And the only way I know how to get rid of it is kind of like, anybody have cats? You know what cats sound like when they're coughing up a hairball? So if that happens, that's what this is for. You have been warned. We're going to start something new today. And I want to start first by sharing a little comedy bit with you that's not original to me. It's actually from one of my favorite comics. I love comedians because they have this incredible knack to be able to see patterns in the world, especially in human behavior and human nature. They exaggerate those things, or maybe they don't, but they kind of make fun of it. And if we're not careful, we can get super offended by it. But one of the things I love about it is because it gives us a moment to laugh at the fact that sometimes our basic stuff is a little absurd. Is that okay to say? Okay. So in 1986, George Carlin, anybody like George Carlin? I think he would have been a great theologian. But at any rate, in 1986, he was asked to do a little thing for a charity relief. It's called Comic Relief. It was dedicated around eradicating poverty. And this is the first time he broke out a little bit that was called A Place for My Stuff. And so I'm going to share some of this with you. And I'll tell you, I've edited this out. I've made this PG. But this is what he says. I love it. He says, your house is a place to keep your stuff. That's what he describes it as. If you didn't have so much stuff, you wouldn't need a house. You could just walk around all the time with your stuff in your pockets. A house is just a pile of stuff with a cover over it. And when you fly and you look down at the cities below, what you see are piles of stuff covered up by the roofs of houses. He then says, and when you leave your house, you've got to lock it up. Why? Because you wouldn't want anybody to come in and steal what? Your stuff. Because they never steal like the stuff, the junk stuff. They never steal like the fourth grade papers that you've been saving that one of these days you might do something with. No, all they want is the shiny stuff. That's what your house is. It's a place to keep all of your stuff while you go out and get what? More stuff. And sometimes you have to have a storage unit because you've got more stuff than your house can cover. And then sometimes you've got to move and you've got to get a bigger house. Why? Because there's no room for your stuff anymore. Did you ever notice, he said, when you go to somebody else's house and they say, make yourself at home, you never quite feel at home? You know why? It's because it's full of their stuff. There's no room for your stuff, and somebody else's stuff is all over the place. And sometimes when you leave your house and you go on vacation, you've got to take some of your stuff with you, right? And so that's what suitcases are for. You've got 2 big suitcases full of stuff when you go on vacation. You've got to take a smaller version of your house with you. It's the second version of stuff. There's truth in that, right? All right, anybody feeling convicted already? Yeah, the stuff. And here's the thing that I've known over the last 20 years of ministry is that Jesus cares about our stuff. And he has things to say about the accumulation of stuff and the sharing of stuff and the giving of stuff and the caring of the stuff that we have. And since Jesus has quite a bit to say about it, we're going to spend the next few weeks in this series called Simple. I'm calling it the more or less life. Just kind of looking at what Jesus says about our stuff and how we might actually develop a spiritual discipline that many people don't consider a spiritual discipline, but it's something called simplicity. Before we do, I make sure people know each time we do something new series-wise, there's always a study guide that goes along with it. If you're in person, you can grab one out in the lobby, paper version. If you're online, you can download it from the series page. If you go to the worship page, it'll be right there with this title, Simple. You can down that. And just so you know, if you want to kind of follow along, here in a little bit, I'm going to be in Luke chapter 12. You're welcome to open up a Bible or just have that ready. But I'm going to tell a story from Jesus in Luke chapter 12. But I want to start this way. Because when I think about my propensity to get stuff, I always have to go back to my childhood from where it starts. Because several decades ago, it was very different when you wanted to buy things. I grew up in the 80s, and even though the 80s were like when all of a sudden credit cards just went crazy and everybody had them, I grew up in a household that didn't have them. And what I learned is you had to be very responsible with your money. And what I learned as a kid is that in order to get stuff, it took a couple things. It took effort and it took time. It took those two things, effort and time, and you had to work hard for the money. You had to save it up, and when you had enough money in your account or in your wallet or in your purse, then you would go to actually buy something. And to go buy something, it actually meant this. You had to get cleaned up, you had to get dressed, you had to walk somewhere or drive somewhere to get the stuff. And then when you got the stuff, you had to drive back home or walk back home with all the effort and the time that it took to get that thing. For me, I remember quite clearly it was getting a gray 10-speed bicycle in Springfield, Missouri. Oh my gosh, that was the thing that I don't know how many yards I mowed to be able to get that item, and I rode the heck out of that. Listen, that's not the case anymore, is it? No cash? No problem. We got credit. And nowadays, you don't have to physically go anywhere. You can click a button. And listen, I'm not condemning that because, man, if you were to look at the Amazon app on my phone and see all the things that I have bought and have come in, you might chastise me for it. But it is so easy now. With just a click of your phone, all the obstacles of getting that stuff, Amazon has figured out how to get to us. And now with Alexa-enabled devices, you don't even have to click. You can just say, Alexa, order dog food. And she does it, and it magically shows up at my house. I don't even have to get out of my pajamas. I don't even have to put on pajamas if I don't want to. I mean, our world has been perfectly engineered and designed to allow us to buy and accumulate more and more stuff. Have you realized that? And secretly, we wouldn't say it out loud, we have begin this lie, to embrace this lie in our world based around our stuff because it's so easy to get, this lie that the more stuff we have means the better life is. Or the bigger stuff that we have, the better life is. How do I know? Because deep down somewhere inside of me, I have a tendency to believe that more is better and bigger is better. Hence, the big drink. Think about this. The average house is 1,000 square feet larger than it used to be 30 years ago. It's almost double the size of the average home at that point. The average size of a master closet in new homes is at least 100 square feet or 10 by 10, but 30 years ago, that was often one of the sizes of the bedroom. And it's not just houses, everything is bigger. Soft drinks are bigger. For us caffeine lovers, that's a good thing. Spoons. We have got spoons in our house that Tammy has a hard time using because they're just so big. I got a large mouth. I can use whatever size spoon there is. Coffee cups are bigger. Cars are bigger. Portion sizes are bigger. See, we believe that more is better and that bigger is better. It has become so much of our American character not only to accept that bigness is great. It's actually something now that we start to admire and to respect and to revere and to glorify it. Size seems to be the indicator of excellence in cars, in tomatoes. I don't even eat tomatoes, but if you tell me to go pick out a tomato, I'm going to pick out the biggest one because to me, bigger is better. Man, audiences, salaries, skyscrapers, muscles, even churches. Bigger, we believe, is better. And we see it in advertising. I think I've heard recently, I don't do this, but you can now supersize your lashes. Do you know what that is? Yeah, make your eyelashes look bigger. You can supersize them bigger. Or places will say, this is the biggest sale we've ever had. And then next month, you know what they say? This is the biggest sale we've ever had. You've got jumbo jets Big Macs, Whoppers. I mean, you're right? No, not the burger, not the candy. Giant subs. Now, one that's confusing to me is Starbucks, because you would think grande, right, is really big. But is grande small there? I'm confused. I'm not that coffee drinker. But you get it. We have this idea even built into our lexicon that things that are bigger are better. And all over America, people will gather in the next few weeks to have a meal where we celebrate and give thanks for everything we have. And then you know what we do? We go out the very next day on something called Black Friday. Why? Because we have fallen for the myth that more equals better. If I could just get more, and if I could get it cheaper, then it's better. But here's the thing. There's another action happening in our culture as well. And I think many things in life, there's pendulums that swing from one end to another. And I think the pendulum is swinging to the other side because there's this push happening for a simpler life. There are countless books, television shows promoting the simple life. And even when it comes to housing, there's this trend, and you can see it on HGTV and other shows, where people will abandon the multiple thousand square foot homes for what they call tiny homes, essentially houses that can fit on the back of a trailer, going from a few thousand square feet down to 300 square feet. Now listen, I'm all for simplicity, but I draw the line at being cooped up in 300 square feet with anyone in the winter. I mean, I love my wife, and because of that, I know she needs a little more space to get away from me at times. Maybe this tend for less or simplicity or tiny is a correcting movement, as things always swing. Maybe it's a correcting movement against our propensity to want more. Or if you're a conspiracy theorist like me sometimes, you might also wonder if this has been expertly designed to help you get more stuff about a new topic. Simplicity. I don't know. I think you get my point, right? More is better. Bigger is better. But what would Jesus have to say about that? And that's where we're going to camp out for the rest of this time in Luke chapter 12. And in this part of the story, Jesus is approached by somebody that calls out to him, teacher, rabbi. He tells Jesus, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Obviously, he thinks that Jesus would have some influence, that if Jesus told his brother to be more generous, then he would be. Now, you need to know, it was common back then for people to approach rabbis in family disputes to help get things resolved. Not just family disputes, but community disputes. It was also common back then that when it came time for an inheritance, the eldest son, by the way, not the female, because they were very patriarchal, but the eldest son would get twice the amount of the inheritance as a younger one. So, just for numbers, an eldest son might inherit $200,000 worth of property, where the next one would only inherit $100,000. And so this man comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, tell my older brother to share the inheritance with me. Essentially, Jesus, tell my older brother to ignore hundreds and hundreds of years of tradition, do something new, and share this inheritance with me. But here's the thing. Jesus didn't answer him the way he wanted him to. In fact, when you read stories and you read the sayings of Jesus, Jesus often doesn't do things the way people would like. And so Jesus then, rather than say anything, he asks the man a question. He starts off by saying, okay, who appointed me to be the judge between the two of you? And then he said one of the most famous lines that you've probably heard. You might not have even known that it came from the Bible or from Jesus. It's a warning to people thousands of years ago, and it's still a warning to us today. Right after that, he says to watch out and to be on your guard against all kinds of greed, because life does not consist of the abundance of possessions. Life doesn't consist about the abundance of, for our words, stuff. That's what he's saying. He's breaking apart this lie, and he's saying that our desire for more and more and more is really a greed problem. And if it's a greed problem, then it's a sin problem. More and bigger do not equal better. He's saying, watch out, be careful. And then to make his point clear, he continues the story. He often just tells stories to make points. He says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what should I do? I have no place to put my crops. Which, by the way, seems like a great problem, doesn't it? He has spent his whole life in business. He has worked very hard. All of a sudden, he is prosperous in his business and has a sizable yield of crops, a large nest egg, if you will, built up. He doesn't have enough room for it all in the garages or the storage containers or the barns that he has, and so he has to come up with a solution. And Jesus says this was the solution. This is what I will do, the man said. I'll tear down my barns and I'm going to build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And then I'll say to myself, self? It doesn't say self, that's me. You have plenty of grain laid up for many years, so take life easy. Eat and drink and be merry. Now let me ask, what's wrong with this? Here's the thing, is I don't know fully what's wrong with this because I have been raised my whole life thinking this is what financial planners have told us to do ever since financial planners existed, right? Work hard, save some stuff up, store up some wealth so that one day you could retire and you could take it easy and you can drink and eat and be merry. But the story continues. God then comes to the man in the story and he tells him, you fool, that's what he says, you fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you, and then who will get what you prepared for yourself? And the man, asking Jesus to give him more of an inheritance, and everyone who has engaged this story seriously since then, everybody that has believed that more is better, takes a deep sigh because Jesus called him out. Jesus calls us out. And in this story, Jesus actually does it in front of a crowd of people because there's people gathered around. Listen, we don't like being called out on our stuff, do we? I mean, I don't. I can't presume that maybe you like it. I don't. And here's what I know is when someone calls me out on my stuff, my gut reaction is to push back against what they're saying, right? I mean, for instance, well, if this was Jesus talking to me, I'd be like, well, Jesus, listen, I mean, that story is great and all, but you said that was a rich man, right, who yielded an abundant harvest. And Jesus, guess what? I'm not rich. Or at least I'm not as rich as that guy. So obviously, Jesus, you're not talking to me. We push back, right? We say, well, we're not that rich, so there must be a loophole. There must be a wiggle around here. And I'm not rich. And Jesus isn't talking about me because if you're like me, then rich is always somebody who has just a little bit more than I do, right? And I'll tell you, in a few years, I actually may have more than I have now, and my definition then is still going to be the rich one is the one that still has more than me. It's how we define rich, but you want to know how Jesus defines rich? Jesus' definition of rich, when you read his stories, is this. It's everything. If you have everything that you need, then you have a little bit more. That means you're rich. In fact, the Lord's Prayer, he teaches us to pray, give us today our daily bread, just enough for today. So Jesus says, if you have a little bit more than what you need, then you are rich. You're rich if you have it all. And Jesus is telling this story to this man, and the question that man should have and the question that we should have is, okay, if that's true, then what do we do? What do we do with the extra stuff? What do we do with it? And listen, in the story, the man decides to store it away from the future. I mean, he does a smart thing. He sets away a nest egg for retirement, which, by the way, is a smart thing to do. I do it. Although I got my retirement statement this last week for the last year, and then I did this, and I prayed over it and laid hands on it and prayed that God would do something because it was like a dumpster fire. That has nothing to do with this, but it's good to be able to set things aside, to set it away for retirement each month. And yet, this man who's doing it, Jesus calls him a fool. I mean, that's why. I mean, that's the real story that's the real question of this story. What has this man done? What has he done wrong for Jesus? I mean, God in flesh to call him a fool. I mean, he didn't waste his money like other people do. Like the prodigal son story, the man takes all the money and blows it. He didn't do that. He didn't build monuments to himself. No, he just worked hard and he had a great yield and he wanted to save as much as he could for his future because you never know what's going to happen in the future. So where exactly did this man go wrong, warranting being called a fool? And here's where I think this all went sideways. And here's why I think we have to adjust our thinking about stuff. I think that what made this man foolish was not the accumulation of wealth. It was not being able to produce a lot of wealth. It was not about whether to save it or to spend it, whether to waste it or save it. No, I think that what made him foolish is that he fell for the lie that in the end, the stuff is the goal. The accumulation of the stuff, that is the goal. Accumulating wealth in the end is what we want to achieve. And once you've achieved that end, then you can kick back and you can take it easy and you can eat, drink, and be merry. Wealth, for many, is the end, not a means to something else. I'm not going to say we, I'm going to say me. Like the rich man in the story, sometimes I treat money as the goal and as the means to a greater life for myself. It's easy to misunderstand the reason why God gives us stuff in the first place. The man thought all that stuff that was given to him was for a blessing for him. It was his future. It was his happiness. It was his measuring stick. But Jesus calls this man out, and I believe Jesus calls us out when we have fallen for the same financial dream, which, by the way, is in part our American dream. Jesus, turned this idea of more and bigger is better upside down because we always assume that the more we have and the bigger we have is better for our own future. And Jesus is making it clear that the only way that more is better is when the more and the bigger is used for a means for something else. And that something else is summed up at the very end of the story where Jesus finishes it this way. He says, "This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but it's not rich towards God." And by the way, people often use this to say, this is all about giving money to the church. That's not what this is about. This is all about a mindset. You see, the man in the story understood something that we often embrace without realizing it. The man thought that when it came to stuff and wealth, that he was a receptacle in life and not a conduit. I think what Jesus is trying to get us to understand. He thought that he was there to receive everything that was given to him instead of being a conduit to take everything that was been entrusted to him and funnel it to whatever God has planned for the world. More stuff does not mean better until, I believe, that stuff is used in really cool, godly ways for the purpose of the world. That's my belief. And when we understand this, then our desire and craving to accumulate more for ourselves, it starts to go down. Now, John Wesley, who is a spiritual ancestor in the Methodist movement, who started this, he had a philosophy around money and spending. And early in his ministry, he made 30 pounds a year. And of that 30, right off for the bat, he lived off of 28 and he gave away 2. Now, if you're a churchy person, you'll be able to do the math and you'll realize, wait, that's not 10%. That's not a tithe. But don't bash him yet. So he lived off of 2. And as his income increased to 60 and 90 and 120 a year, he continued to live off of 28. Why? So that he can funnel the rest. In fact, he also often got criticized for the length of his hair because he wouldn't get haircuts as often because he just thought it was frivolous. I cut my hair like a week and a half ago for the first time in 6 months. I don't think I can make it that long again. I tried. You see, when he was questioned about this, John Wesley answered. He says this. He says, "I have 2 silver spoons at London and 2 at Bristol. This is all the plate that I have to present, and I shall not buy any more while so many around me have want of bread." He realized that he had enough. And as long as other people had need, he would take care of that. There's also this ancient Roman proverb that gained some notoriety at one point. It talked about money, and this idea of the quest for more money was like seawater. It's like drinking seawater, because if you drink seawater, the more you drink, the thirstier you get and the sicker that you get. More is not better, because more, often, more than not, leads us to just want what? More and more and more. King Solomon, one of the men who've been through our scriptures, through the Hebrew scriptures, been assumed as one of the wisest men that ever lived. Certainly very smart. His book Ecclesiastes is filled with thoughts of a man who has searched the whole world over and then some for a meaning for life. And in the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, the way it's translated in there, it says this. He says, God made man simple. Man's complex problems are of his own devising. Solomon's idea was, after he searched it all, he's like, God made it simple. It's us who have made it more complicated. It's us who have made things more difficult. We are wired, I believe, to be simple, and yet somehow we have perverted our desires for stuff so much that the desire for stuff is like drinking seawater out of a 44-ounce styrofoam cup. Maybe the books and the TV shows right now about living simpler, maybe they're picking up on this. Maybe this tiny house craze is actually onto something. Maybe moving from our 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 square foot home to a 300 or 400 or 500 square foot home is just a drastic attempt to actually get us back to the way we were designed, which is to be simple. Maybe. But here's the caution I want all of you to embrace as we finish up today is you can listen to all of this. You can be like, yeah, this is great stuff. We need to be more simple, and there's rules that we need to follow around all of this. And if we follow these rules, then we'll have the life that really is life. And listen, if that is what you're taking away, then you have just fell for the art of missing the point. Because here's the thing. At the heart of simplicity, it is a life altering experience that God wants us to embrace. And once we do, then what happens is we have freedom to experience all the other aspects of life in a whole new way. Simplicity is not just a way of life or rules to live by. It is a spiritual discipline. You see, our tendency is to make steps out of things or take a class or to take a pill or to take a diet or some sort of rules to change certain things in life. And when it comes to simplicity, it's easy to boil this down to some rules. And if you follow these rules, then you're living up to what Jesus wants you to do. But listen, if you have that approach, then what you're gonna start having is the fact that anytime you create a rule, what you've done is you've said the thing that you've created a rule against is evil. And Jesus never said that stuff was evil. Jesus never said that money and wealth and stuff was bad. Worshiping a rule will lead you to renouncing possessions and wealth, while simply the inner spiritual discipline of it will actually help you put it in its rightful place. I knew somebody years ago that told me, Pastor Ben, I don't know what I can do for the church, but somehow, some way, I just know how to make money. And so I'm going to make money and I'm going to use it out in the world, in which I said, hallelujah. I got this pastor's hot tub fund if you want to. Joking, by the way. Fried chicken fund, that's a whole nother thing. But the spiritual discipline of simplicity is this inward reality that results in an outward lifestyle. And it can begin anytime. It can begin here. Inside. It begins today by allowing God to work within the largest part of our life, our stuff, our possessions, our wealth, our money, our retirement, our things. It's a grace, actually, of God. It's a power of God that can change you. And when it does, the result is seen out there. People see it. Money and stuff, listen, they enable you to do a lot of things in this world, but when they enable you to do great godly things in this world, incredible stuff happens. If you're on social media, you may have seen the meme or the picture that says, whenever you've been given more, don't build larger homes, build a bigger table. It's that mentality. Jesus warns us that to think that everything that we have is available for just ourselves, rather than the rest of God's kingdom, that to have that lifestyle is to be foolish. Life does not exist solely for the accumulation of stuff. And so may we here, or you online, may we realize that more does not equal better, and bigger does not equal better. In fact, may we come to realize when we seek God's kingdom first that the opposite is true. That less could be a better life, and that less could be more. So let's embrace this today in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.